Welcome to another episode of the Sports Sentiment. I am your host, Nick Urias, and we are back once again talking NBA basketball. It's officially the offseason in the NBA world now, and Game 7 between the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Indiana Pacers officially comes to a close. Our first NBA Finals Game 7 in over 9 years, and it got a whole lot of hype despite this series between two small market Midwest teams not getting a whole lot of hype. It was one of the most watched NBA Finals games in several years. And let's just start right off the top here. We're not going to waste any time. Great series. I mean, we got 7 games out of this bad boy. There was a lot of people, just I couldn't believe the amount of disrespect that this series as a whole was just getting between the Pacers and the Thunder. People thought OKC potential sweep or gentleman sweep 5 games. And quite honestly, I just really didn't understand it. The Pacers have been on this magic carpet ride of a run. And to all the heroic comebacks, Tyrese Haliburton heroics and all of his clutch shots inside the final 2 minutes and inside, the final 2 seconds of some of these games, whether it was the Milwaukee series, the New York Knicks series, the Cleveland Cavaliers round 2 series in game 1 where they stole the game, or game 2 rather. This was just one of those runs that you can't really script. You can't really chalk up. And, the Pacers, I mean, it came down to the final game of the year. The Indiana Pacers, they were one of these teams this year, right? They were 4-5 in the Eastern Conference as far as seeding's concerned. And, they played really good down the stretch as far as the regular season. Post All-Star break, they were great. Never in the first half, still trying to find themselves after making quite honestly, a heroic run last year in the playoffs, winning a game 7 at MSG. And still nobody really bought into that team. And they got talent, they got depth, they got dudes that can score. The defense has been all over the place this year, but they found a way to, make it to 7 games. They stole the game 1 in OKC. Game 2 was just the ultimate flat spot, the ultimate bounce back spot for the Thunder. Game 3 at Indiana, first final games in a long time since the Reggie Miller era. You knew they were going to show up and show out. That crowd was. They win game 3, and then game 4. I was telling Lewis and Jonathan on our radio show, once when game 4 was rolling around, that whoever wins game 4 is ultimately going to win the series. And you see the Pacers come out in that game 4, start bombing threes, hitting all these shots. Obi Toppin's going nuts. Neesmith is hitting all these side pocket threes. Like, all the role guys are going off. All the dudes that typically play better at home, the complimentary guys, were playing terrific. And it was just one of those games where the Pacers were just shooting the basketball at such a high clip. You're thinking, OKC is going to be in a heap of trouble here. But that defense, that OKC defense, they are never out of it. And it's amazing, in a league, in an NBA league that we are in today, where we're so highly reliant on the 3-point shot, overly reliant. Look at the Boston Celtics this year. They jacked up over 63s a game. Those Mike D'Antoni, teams years ago at the Houston Rockets, heavily reliant on the 3. And look, they crash and burn at some point. Injuries are a part of it, but they ultimately crash and burn those teams. And that OKC defense, it was so good, historically great, that it really didn't matter how many threes they made. I mean, in the game 4, they completely out-executed Indiana in the fourth quarter. And the Pacers, man, when they ran into that buzzsaw of a defense, when that defense was firing, when Caruso, Wallace, Dort, J-Dub, SGA is over here reading the passing lanes, you become stagnant. And even the best, of best offenses like the Indiana Pacers, don't know what to do in the half court. So, the OKC defense, it all starts with that. And in a game 4 where they only made 3 triples, the fact that they still won that game was remarkable. And I thought, man, this series is over. 2-2 heading back to game 5. I thought game 5 was just the ultimate situation for the Thunder to take a 3-2 lead. But man, credit the Indiana Pacers for coming back home in game 6, not only winning the game, but drilling the Thunder in that game six. I mean, OKC just anemic offensively. Quite honestly, a joke in that game. The Pacer defense, I have to say, the Pacer defense isn't great, but man, when they show up and you got Andrew Nembhard and you got Aaron Neesmith, you know, grinding you and, face guarding you and, quite honestly, they can get a little bit away with it on some nights with the officials' whistle. They're they're awesome. Defensively, they're a great team. But when you play the Thunder and when you play against a guy in SGA, there are going to be situations and spots in some of these playoff series and games where you're not going to get the greatest whistle. And that's why you see Rick Carlisle going nuts in a game five. And I thought he was going to get tossed in the first couple minutes of the game. But the Indiana Pacers, man, that was just a dominant game six from them. I mean, heck, they even have Ben Shepherd like drilling buzzer beating threes at the end of quarters. Belmont Bruin, by the way, mid-major team there. Just the pipeline that the Indiana Pacers that they've been producing with this young talent. You got to give a whole lot of credit, to that organization. Very quietly over these years, been drafting very well, have made the right moves. The Pascal Siakam trade has been one of the best trades, quite honestly, in recent memory. There's a bunch of moves that help teams, take them to the next level. That Siakam trade, I mean, it is night and day of, the impact that he's made for that group. And quite honestly, Pascal Siakam, one of the most underappreciated all-stars that the NBA has to offer. You see it with his numbers. You see it the way that he dominated in the Knicks series, the way that he could rim run and beat teams, a furious pace, and the way that he drives downhill. It's something that, hasn't gotten enough credit within the league. And, I'm glad that he was doing it at such a high level in a more enhanced and expanded role this year compared to when he was on those Raptor teams. Because those Raptor teams, I still thought he was underappreciated, despite the fact that he brought a lot to the table for that championship run in 2019. And look, now he's like the number two option, sometimes the number one option on, in some of these games this year. So kudos to Siakam. He deserves a whole lot of credit since he's came in and been wearing an Indiana Pacer uniform. But the game seven, I mean, a whole lot of hype going into it. I was excited. It's game seven of the NBA Finals. What more do you want? Some basketball fans haven't even witnessed that before. And, you just have the opportunity to see something great. Now, man, my heart just breaks for the man, the point guard, the dude that has transcended that Indiana Pacers organization, and Tyrese Haliburton, because you knew immediately the second he goes down in the first quarter, banging his hand on the hardwood, the way, if you watch sports and you see the way that these guys fall and the way that they react, they know it. You just knew it was an Achilles tear right away. And your heart breaks for the kid, especially in that moment. I was just like, you got to be kidding me. Like, the guy that drilled 3 threes to start out the game, and they were not easy threes. Like, he was shooting those from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and drilling them. So, man, your heart breaks for the kid, especially because it's an Achilles tear, and tearing it at that point, just the magnitude of the game. But at this portion of the season, he's gone all next year. The Pacers are a drastically different team with him, off the court in that game in particular in game seven, but all throughout next year. We could most certainly talk about their plan. I don't know what the plan is for the Pacers, from their perspective is, because you can't replace a guy like that. Over 20 points per game in the regular season, double-digit assists. He was like the number one assists per game man in the league this year. So there's no replacing that. I mean, he's just a magnet for defenses, and that's why the role guys on this team are so good. So your heart breaks for the kid. I mean, he tweeted out such a heartfelt message on Twitter post Achilles injury, and you just felt once when he got hurt, you're like, okay, it's not like you completely eliminate the Pacers from winning the game, because they got the depth, they got the TJ McConnell emergence that they got in this series and throughout these playoffs, where he could quite honestly just wreck a game with his defense. And it was one of those things. It's game seven. You got to throw out all the records, all the narratives, everything out the window, and you got just let the players play on the court. So it's one of these things like, yes, it's a bummer. Yes, the Pacers' chances of winning the game decrease quite a bit, but you can't rule anything out because we've seen some crazy stuff and outcomes in these games, in these playoff games this season. So it's just a bummer when, a team's not 100% like that. And especially what Haliburton brings to the table, it absolutely stinks. All this stuff about, with OKC and just this being a Mickey Mouse ring, I say get that malarkey out of here. Here's the bottom line, folks. All of championship runs in all sports, there is some sort of element of luck to it. There's good fortune. Look at the Warriors in 2015. Look at every championship run. There is, at some point, there's going to be a whistle that breaks your way. A 50-50 ball that you corral. There's a bunch of different elements and layers to a game in a series. A team not being 100%. Injuries are a part of the game. And, you could look back on, just a lot of the champions that are crowned in all sports, and the opposing side is not at 100% at some point in the playoffs. So it's a game seven. The game is drastically different. I get it. But this OKC team from start to finish this year was the best team in the NBA. There's no doubt about it. Offensively and defensively especially, but offensively, I mean, this is a team that they won 68 regular season games. I mean, they were just terrific in so many different facets this season. As far as the Game 7's concerned, the 103-91 win for Oklahoma City. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, 29 points, 12 rebounds. Jalen Williams, Santa Clara kid, Santa Clara Bronco for 3 years, 20 points. Chet Holmgren, 18 points, 5 blocks. Man, a menace as far as shot blocking is concerned. Was like that at Gonzaga, has proven to be that consistently throughout these playoffs. Just such a vital part to what the Thunder are as a team. And Alex Caruso and Cason Wallace, 10 points each. For two guys that are just known for their defense, the fact that they're dropping 10 each, that tells you all you need to know on what OKC did in that game from an offensive standpoint. And then, just on the other side, Andrew Nembhard. I even sent out a tweet like mid-game when Haliburton went down, like, hey, if the Pacers pull this off, Andrew Nembhard, you could make a very strong case for him for MVP. And I'll say this, Andrew Nembhard, you get into a game 7 and you get into these high leverage moments in the playoffs. And I want a guy that has quite honestly, I want a guy that's played in some big games in his college career, because every player's nervous. There's no doubt about that. I don't care who you are, but there's that sort of belief and there's that sort of experience that you could rely upon. Like, hey, Andrew Nembhard, I played X amount of seasons at Gonzaga and I was in March Madness every single year. I like stuff like that. If you've been listening to this podcast for a long time, I like the 4-year college kids. I like the guys that have been exposed to different environments, hostile environments, playing on the road, just being exposed to different situations. I think that helps you for the biggest of moments, like the NBA Finals Game 7. And look, Andrew Nembhard, first play of the game, Rick Carlisle says, you're getting the ball, you're going to score us the bucket, and you're going to get us a free throw line jumper, and you're going to drill it. And he did. Andrew Nembhard, just an absolutely fearless player, and I know he's not up for a free agent until like 2027, but that'll be here before you know it. That very well could be a starting point guard in the NBA, just for what he can bring to the table, and from a defensive perspective as well, taking the number 1 assignment on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. For limiting the MVP, he did a great job. He shut down Jalen Brunson in the Eastern Conference Finals Game 6, to ultimately put the Pacers, as the Eastern Conference champions and in this finals versus the Thunder. So Andrew Nembhard deserves a whole lot of credit. He got a lot of credit last year for, his offensive output. He had a couple 30-point games in the playoffs last year, but this year for what he did defensively, I think deserves some kudos as well. Hey, TJ McConnell was great, in these playoffs this series. I thought he was a big part of the game three. Just he had like three stolen inbounds and layups for the Pacers in that game three, but 16 points in this game. It seemed like every third quarter, like towards like the back end of the series, you knew he was going to go off and he was going to have 10 points. Didn't matter what production you got out of Haliburton, he was going to get double digits no matter what. But the 7 turnovers in a game seven, very problematic. And that goes back to our point that when you don't have the guy that hardly turnovers the ball in Tyrese Haliburton, that is unfortunately the drop off, and that's the absence that you get. You get TJ McConnell having to play all these minutes, and instead of being the spark plug and the pesky guy that comes off the bench, now you're the starting point guard, and that definitely stinks. But just overall, I thought the Pacers were just rattled from that point on, especially in the third quarter. I mean, they had a halftime lead, but in that third quarter, OKC's defense really turned it up, and TJ McConnell as the primary ball handler, Lou Dort figured him out. Alex Caruso and Cason Wallace figured him out. And, just the Pacers overall were just stagnant offensively. They weren't doing him any favors. They had like four guys in the corner at one point, and it's like, okay, what do you want him to do? He's throwing a 25-foot pass, to the right corner to somebody. And, OKC's just defense was just smothering. But Lou Dort, I thought ultimately was the guy that kind of started that third quarter run defensively for the Thunder, because if you've been watching the Thunder these playoffs, it all starts with their defense, like we said, but then their defense, once when it gets going, that's when the avalanche happens. And for what's a 4-point game, it turns into a 15-point game. And I think it was pretty evident in this series where once when OKC got up to 15, Indiana can threaten, but they can never get over the hump. Only in the game one it happened. Over the course of 7 games in this series, it's just not going to happen. And, the Thunder are just way too talented from an offensive standpoint, to give up, that big of a lead. It only happened one game, especially without Haliburton in that game 7. You just knew it wasn't going to happen. So Oklahoma City Thunder, your 2025 NBA champions, and just an incredible team. 19-2 after a loss this season, 7-0 in the postseason. They were 29-1 in the regular season against the Eastern Conference this year. Like this was a dominant regular season team, and I know every team values in the NBA, they value the regular season differently. Like the Washington Wizards and the Atlanta Hawks value the regular season differently. So, like, I get it. Load management happens, but, dude, you win 68 games. Like, you're a dominant team. You're a damn good team. So, OKC, nobody can discount and disrespect for what they've done. They're champions. And, they were the best team in the league all year, especially in the West. Like, they had, they were up double digits, games ahead of the second seed in the West. So, in the West, we look how good it was this year, like 11 teams deep, and it's going to be just as good, if not better, next year with all these emerging teams. So the Thunder, 29-1 record versus the East is just, it's otherworldly in the regular season, that is. And, that third quarter for, the Thunder, 18 of their 34 points off turnovers in that game 7. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, your finals MVP. He's the 4th player in NBA history to win regular season MVP, finals MVP, and the regular season scoring title. He's also the 5th player ever with 20 points and 10 assists in an NBA Finals Game 7. Ever, that is. Jerry West, Walt Frazier, James Worthy, and LeBron James. That's a pretty damn good list. As far as OKC is concerned, let's just talk about the journey to this championship. We talked about their brilliant regular season, but this is a team that's been around since they located to Oklahoma City, from Seattle, that being the Supersonics. OKC's been in a bunch of trial and error, right? Like this is a team that's gone for a couple of times in their 18-year existence now as a franchise. They've been very good from a drafting and player evaluation standpoint. I mean, drafting Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, right? Got to the finals, ran into LeBron James, didn't work out. They kept trying and trying and trying with KD. And, then they ran into the Warriors, front end of the dynasty. And then KD departs, right? But this OKC team has had their shots with their fair share, of course. They tried it with Russell Westbrook, Carmelo Anthony, in the back end of his career, and then they had Paul George, right? You know, what makes the league so, just interesting and compelling from a fan standpoint, and it's just amazing to see these GMs and the way that they evaluate their team. And some GMs and ownership groups believe, hey, we could still win with this team. And, they could still go for it. But Oklahoma City, Sam Presti, before Mark Dagnall got there, when they still had Billy Donovan, they understood we're going to go into a rebuild. And when a team admits they're in a rebuild, I kind of like it because you understand the direction. This is the whole problem with the NBA and why, there's a lot of teams out there like the Chicago Bulls, like the Atlanta Hawks, the Miami Heat, the Phoenix Suns. That kind of that area, everyone calls it sports purgatory. You're stuck right in the middle, and that's the worst situation that you can be in. You either want to be contending for a championship or you want to be, taking and acquiring draft capital and, salary dumping if you can. OKC understood, hey, we can't win with Paul George and Russell Westbrook. We tried it for a couple years, and Damian Lillard hit a buzzer beater in our face. We crashed and burned in the first round. That's okay. We're going to go sell high on all these players. Well, they admitted that they wanted to go into a rebuild, and when they traded away Paul George, because they got the 5 first-round picks. They got Danilo Gallinari, and they got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Now, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, young guy, like 21, 22 years old, at the time, still extremely young. Nobody knew what he was capable of. No one knew that he was going to be an MVP. But you kind of had to go out there and just acquire talent. It was all about the first-round picks at that time. So OKC admitted that they were in a rebuild, and that's the direction. Everybody understands in the room. When you trade Paul George years ago, okay, we know the direction that we're going to go in. And, you'll get fans in the stands and some nights and you won't. But to me, it's all about the direction of where your franchise is going. Because when you don't know where it's going, then you got dysfunction all over the place. And then you got, angry fans and, the whole 9 yards. It just provides more clarity for all parties involved. Now, they traded Paul George years ago. They traded Russell Westbrook to the Rockets, that was, and they got Chris Paul and 2 first-round picks. Like, they just trading those 2 guys. 7 first-round picks and some players and some guys to build around. Okay. They tried out with those guys, okay? Hey, yeah, we're going to just roll these guys out, all right? Let's see where it goes. We're going to develop some young talent. We're going to have some veterans like a Chris Paul and like a Gallinari to kind of steer this franchise and try to build this thing back up with our young assets. And, this is just kind of from my perspective of it. SGA, I think, in a sense, wouldn't be where he is without the veteranship of Chris Paul. Now, obviously, SGA is much better of a player than Chris Paul, of course. But Chris Paul kind of teaches, SGA, I wouldn't say the antics, but hey, you can get away with this. You can, hey, use this move and you might get a whistle. All the tendencies that an 18, 20-year vet has, in his toolbox, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, is pinpointing and learning from and, applying to his game. That stuff's important. And, you just listen to, players in league circles like guys that have been on the road trips and, stayed in the same hotels for a decade and a half. It becomes a routine and, you start to crack the code on the league. Now, that team in 2019 and 20, the COVID year, the bubble, that team exceeded expectations. 44-28 record, 5th in the West. Surprise team that year, lost to the first round versus the Rockets in 7 games. Now, Sam Presti, general manager, despite the successful season, had to make himself a bold move. Now, general managers, all these dudes, executives, you got to make bold moves to win. You got to make that trade where, might have people on the fence. Sometimes you swing and miss, other times you hit a home run. And Sam Presti made a very bold move not to bring back Billy Donovan, because he knew that he had this young head coach that was climbing the ladder, and more importantly, in their pipeline with Mark Dagnall. Coached 5 years with the G League affiliate, the OKC Blue, won a championship there. So, that is all a part, it's all part of the journey of building a championship team. You got to make that bold move. And that was the bold move for Sam Presti. Hey, we had a really good season in 2019 and 2020, Billy Donovan, but we're not going to renew your contract because we got this guy. And Mark Dagnall, they believed in him. Hell, he only won 22 games in year one with the Thunder. Still trying to figure it out. Was selling high on a bunch of players like Al Horford. Sam Presti, go look at like the trade history that he had in like 2019. This guy was just crazy with all the transactions that he was making. And that's all a part of, rebuilding. You got to make moves. You got to, maybe sell high on some veterans like they did with, George and Westbrook. Now different tier with an Al Horford, or they had Kemba Walker at one point, but this is all part of, good business and, getting your team better. And more importantly, OKC, they understood, hey, an anomaly season. We're going to restart here with the coach, and we're going to build this thing back up. Won 22 games in year one with Dagnall. Only won 24 games in year two. And that was the year that they drafted Giddey. And, they tanked for a really good pick. And then this is when all their 7 first-round picks came into play. They drafted Jalen Williams. They drafted Chet Holmgren. Holmgren, number 2 pick. J-Dub, the 12th pick. And then Holmgren tore his ACL in the offseason. But they went 40-42. Okay, a step in the right direction. And then, you could kind of understand with their young talent. We got Gilgeous-Alexander now. SGA at this point was already, being that 20-point per game guy. Can he be the number one option? We don't know. I think the league kind of understood it. OKC understood that SGA could really be something special at this point. But he had to go out there and prove it. And he also needed, a decent supporting cast around him. And they got that with Jalen Williams. Terrific player from Santa Clara at 3 years. We'll get into J-Dub a little bit more in a minute. And then Holmgren, who was extremely hyped out, coming out of high school, had the 1 year at Gonzaga, was the number 2 pick, of course. And then, he tore his ACL. But with the combination of their young talent and the draft picks, this team was destined to break out and, ultimately go make a playoff run. Kind of take that next step. 40-42 last year, in the regular season. 57-25 record. First in the West. But I had to say, and I said this at the time last year, when we were entering the playoffs for this OKC team, that I am very glad that they did not make a move at the trade deadline, simply because, hey, you got a young team, go experience the playoffs for the first time, and we're not necessarily we're in the championship window now, but it's one of those things. Let's go figure it out. Go get exposed to the atmosphere of the playoffs and the physicality of it. And then we'll make the right roster moves to address our weaknesses and how we lose the playoff series. They lost to the Dallas Mavericks in 6 games last year. What happened? Hey, we figured out that Josh Giddey's unplayable, at this point of the season with what we have personnel-wise. And we have Daniel Gafford and Derrick Jones Jr. just rim running and getting all of these lobs in this playoff series. So what did they go get? They go trade Josh Giddey for Alex Caruso, player for player. No problem with that. Great trade. You go get yourself, a perimeter defender that can shoot the three, score, and more importantly, a veteran presence that's won before that, these young guys can learn from. And you get Isaiah Hartenstein to just forget about all of that mess that, Gafford and Jones Jr. killed you with. He's going to be back in transition, and, he's going to halt all the big men, from rim running. That is how you address your weaknesses. And, you got to credit Sam Presti. It's definitely easier said than done, but he knew what he wanted, and he went and got it. So credit to him. They run it back this year. They get all the injury luck, right? Holmgren gets hurt at the start of the year. J-Dub stays healthy. SGA stays healthy. All their role guys are, for the most part, healthy on this team, and they get it through. And that's all a part of the good fortune and the good luck aspect of this as well, right? Now, man, like that is quite honestly how you get it done. That's the journey for this OKC Thunder team. And credit to Sam Presti. There's a reason why he won Executive of the Year, and he just understood early on. You don't wait and with the Paul George and the PG-13 era, the PG-13 era and the Russell Westbrook, excuse me, trade away both of them when you know it's not going to work. And he understood ownership and Sam Presti understood that. And what they do, they sold high on all of them. They got they got a desperate Clipper team that wanted to win so bad with Kawhi Leonard, and they made it work. Let's talk about Jalen Williams for a minute. The kid from Santa Clara that went to Santa Clara, that is. 24 points per game in the NBA Finals versus the Pacers, 5 rebounds per game. Everyone he's a great scoring output, but his defense, second team all defense this year. 12th pick, like we said, in the 2022 NBA draft, and the 3 years at Santa Clara. This kid was the number one option at Santa Clara. Just one of those guys that continued to get better and better and better. He's only 24 years old. Everyone can have this argument, right now, and, the media folks and the podcasters like me and everybody else on TV is going to have this argument, during the offseason, like, hey, they're going to have OKC is going to have a really tough decision, like in a year or two. Who are you gonna pay? You gonna pay Jalen Williams or Chet Holmgren? Because you're paying Caruso, you're gonna have to pay SGA. I guess that's gonna determine, the super max, if you will, there for SGA. How much he takes is going to be dependent on what you have. They're paying Hartenstein, because the Knicks paid him, or he was a free agent and then the Thunder ripped the checkbook for him, which I understood. It was one of those ordeals where the Thunder didn't have players to pay, and they paid him, and they won the championship. You win the championship, that's what ultimately matters. With the whole luxury tax and the first and second apron stuff that Silver has, implemented within the league now, teams are going to go all in for the championship. They're going to try to run it back the next year, and then you might have to pull back, and you might have to trade away some guys that really made an impact on your roster during that championship. And, ultimately, say, hey, we're going to retool. We're going to go do something in the draft. And that's why OKC is set up to do something very special here. I'm not going to say a dynasty, but I'm going to say they have the assets to not only run it back with the same roster next year. Everybody's under contract next year. Not to mention you're going to have Nikola Topic next year, who tore his ACL last year. He's coming back from that. The Thunder spent the 15th pick, the overall pick, for Topic. So you're going to have him next year. That's another potential rotational piece that can impact your roster. But you still have another 3 picks in the draft this week, and several more first-round picks in the ongoing future. So the Thunder, from a asset and draft capital standpoint, are set up to really, make a run, a dynasty run. The fact that you could go back to back next year, you could win 3 out of the 4 next championships. Now, it goes back to our point. Injuries, good fortune, right? There's a whole bunch of different things. The West is improving. San Antonio's coming up. Houston is starting to become a little bit more interesting. You can't discount the Warriors. The Lakers, good regular season team, but I don't know. My point is that the West is thriving and improving and retooling, and this OKC team, they're going to be in the equation again. They're going to be the favorites, but every year is different. And the Oklahoma City Thunder, based on their draft picks and what they have, if they continue to draft well, which Sam Presti has historically been very good at, there's an opportunity here where if you lose Chet Holmgren, in free agency or whatever it may be, or you have to trade him. There might be another guy waiting in the pipeline for his turn because of what Sam Presti's been able to do with all these first round picks, which I think go into 2030. So they are sitting pretty well from that standpoint. But at the end of the day, we have to play the games on the court and everything gets settled there. Of course, uh, you know, that's just the way things go. But I really like, if you're an Oklahoma City fan, congrats on the championship. You got to really like where your organization is at, where your team's at, and the fact that there's no egos on this team either. SGA, extremely humble, very soft spoken. He's one of these all stars and superstars now. I think you could say he's an MVP. He's one of the he's won the scoring title this year. He is one of these guys that he is a team first guy. He's just extremely humble. You hear him talk after the championship, and he's all like, I'm just soaking in the moment. And there is just no ego on this guy. There's no me, me, me. Hey, look at me. Sure, I got some crazy swagger and style to me. Maybe not my sort of style, but he is just one of these dudes that is just so unselfish that you know players like playing with him. And you throw in Jalen Williams, you throw in Chet Holmgren, you throw in Caruso and Hartenstein and all those guys on the team. Jalen Williams, the Jalen Williams from Arkansas, good locker room presence. That is just a team where you just look at them and you're like, wow, like if this team, has this same attitude and same mindset 2 years from now, I mean, we'll see if dudes take pay cuts and all that other stuff. Time will tell. That it becomes very interesting because that you just don't see that in the business in the world of sports, these days where you get a bunch of guys that are very unselfish and are composed and are very narrow-minded and hey, let's go run it back. That's tough to come by because at the end of the day, it's human nature. Everyone wants to take care of themselves, their families, and, of course, put themselves, set themselves up for the rest of their life and their kids and grandkids and etc. So we'll see how this pans out for OKC. Obviously, they're going to enjoy this championship. Congrats to them. Great team, fun team to watch. And, for a small market team that has been around the NBA for 18 years, has tried and tried, and hasn't gotten over the mountaintop. Now that they're there and they've gotten their championship and it's the first one in franchise history, the first one always feels good. Like, as a Warrior fan, the 2015 championship will always feel the greatest. And then I would say the 2022 championship felt the second greatest. Those KD ones were nice. Don't get me wrong. But those other ones, the other two, the most recent one and the first one, they just feel more rewarding based on, the journey and, the roster construction and how you ultimately won the championship. All of that is into, you got to throw that into the equation, Warrior fans. But hey, OKC, congrats to you. Very likable players. Yeah, it was one of those things too. Is one of these championships remind me of the Nuggets Heat series. These teams have never won. None of the players have really won before. I'm not gonna be mad who wins the championship. And quite honestly, from that standpoint, I was rooting for the Pacers, in Game 7, just because it was like, oh my gosh, like they have a chance to throw one of the most improbable playoff runs, maybe ever in all sports. Quite honestly, you could very well make that argument. Just based on the way that they came back and they weren't even really in that top tier discussion. The fact that they made the championship and forced to Game 7 and were one game away from winning it all. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself but just root for that. OKC ultimately wins it, and as a neutral fan that didn't have a dog in the fight, ultimately in that Game 7, when it was all said and done, I was rooting for the Pacers, but I can't be mad that the Thunder won. So that will do it for this episode of the Sports Sentiment. Great NBA season, great NBA playoffs, And look, we got the NBA draft coming up. We got the NBA draft. We're recording this on Tuesday, June 24th. We got the NBA draft tomorrow. We got a bunch of NBA trades that are currently going on. KD to the Rockets, Drew Holiday to the Blazers, Jordan Poole to the Pelicans, even though I don't think that really means too much. But we're going to have our own separate episode for that. We're going to be talking all the NBA trades. We're going to get into the NBA draft prospects. We're going to talk about, the winners and losers of the NBA draft, some second round steals. Hey, last year we talked about the second round steals. We talked about Jamal Shed getting drafted to the Raptors. Look at the impact he made. I thought Zach Edey was going to be good for the Memphis Grizzlies. He made himself an impact. We knew that he was going to start and play tons of minutes on that Grizzlies team this year. So definitely, if you got your ears peeled on the draft, for a guy that, watches college basketball, that has seen these guys blossom and grow, and how that could translate to the NBA. I think we could potentially find some diamonds in the rough here. Some guys where, hey, they might be, number 40 overall in this year's draft, but they're gonna make an impact on this year's roster. So we're gonna compile a list. We'll see what the draft results look like. We're gonna let all these NBA trades, sit, marinate, let the dust settle, and then our next episode, we'll record it later this week, and we'll come back and we'll talk all of that stuff, because the NBA offseason is officially here, and we already know there's a bunch of moving parts, new teams, all-stars getting dealt, salaries being dumped, the whole 9 yards. And, as a podcaster, as a guy that's a fan of the league, this is the fun part. And it's one of the many fun parts of, the season. That's, analyzing things and what ifs and all that other stuff, buying low on like the young and up and coming teams, and, being, early to the party, on some potential young teams that could be something next year. It's all part of the fun. And, that's why I'm here, because I love talking about it. So yeah, stay tuned for all of that. But that will do it for this episode of the Sports Sentiment. Once again, I am your host, Nick Urias, and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.